Let's look into the basics of animation. The first thing we are going to be doing is we're going to switch the workspace to animation, which gives us this very nice graph editor. You're going to be dealing a lot with the graph editor whenever you are doing any kind of animation. The most essential thing when it comes to animating anything is that we have to learn how to set a key. And the key stores the position in a certain time. So the way we do this is that, let's say we want to animate this guy going like from here to here. We can now see that the value here changes. So we ideally really want to set a key here, and we want us to set a key here, but at different times. So the way we do this is we make sure that we are in the first frame. Then we find the channel we want. You can set a key on the selected channel. So right click, key selected, and now you can see it turns red. We have a little key here as well, which has been created. Then we can go forward in the frames. Then we can move it to the position we want. And then we can right click and we can key select it. And now you can see here that we have created a key. If you select both of them and hit the F key, now these two will be framed. So now if we were to scrub in the time slider, we can now see that we have created animation. And this is the very, very basics of animation, which is literally setting a key and setting another key, and now we have animation between them. We can also scrub here as well, and we can also hit the play button right here. Now, when we hit the play button, what you can see is that this is stupid fast. This is around 70 frames, which would be around 3 seconds, but it just goes pew, which means it will just play it as it goes along. So what we really have to do is we have to click on this little guy here, the actual man and the little portal, and we click on it, and now we get up the time slider settings. So what we do is when we go to playback speed, we set this to 24 FPS. So when we hit save now it's actually going to play at 24 FPS. So now you can see that this actually plays at real time, or rather it plays at 24 FPS, which is exactly what we want in this case. Otherwise, you're just going to have insane speeds and you can't actually evaluate anything. And I'm actually not sure why this is set to play every frame by default, because you can't actually use it to evaluate your animation. So we can change the visible frames by dragging this slider here. You can also see that you can do the same by changing the numbers here as well. So we can drag this all the way to 200. So 200 is the maximum because this is what we set as the max in our entire scene. So we can set this to something like 500. And we can drag it all the way up. And now we have 500 frames here. We can also set the visible frames to something else. So if we were to play the animation, it would only play whatever is in here, which makes it a bit easier if you only want to see a certain part of the frame as well. If you want to move these frames, you can do that in the graph editor by moving them around like so. You can just move them left to right, up and down. Or we can do it in the time slider as well by holding on the shift key, moving over a frame. You see now it turns red. This means it's now selected. So now if we do this here, now we can just move it by holding in the middle and just dragging over it. So now you can see we're actually moving the frame. This is how I prefer to move the frames. We can also move the frames in the graph editor as well by selecting them and holding on the shift key and then dragging left to right. This just moves it in terms of time and not up and down. So it doesn't actually change the value of it, which is really nice because now we can change the timing without changing the actual position of it. So the way we have to read the graph editor is, it took me a little bit of time for this to become intuitive, but here you can see what's going on. So here we have the actual frames, which is on the top here. You can see those being marked under the dark gray. And then on the bottom here, we have, on the y-axis, we have the actual value. And you can see that this here is the value of around -5, because that's the value we have here. So if we're now to move this up and down, you can see this changes here as well. So you can actually animate directly in the graph editor without having to go in and change anything in the channel box. So for instance, if you want to move this, let's set this to 50 so that this is set to 53. Because now if we were to play the animation, you can now see what's going on. But if we want this to go even further, we can move this down. So now it's going to be set to -7. If you hold on the Alt key and middle mouse button, we can pan around. So we can set it all the way down like so. Now it's -9. So if we were to do it now you can see it's going to move all the way over here to -9. So that's what I mean that you can actually animate directly in the channel or in the graph editor. Move this all the way back here. Then we can change the start point as well. Now we can set this to -2. We can set it to 2, whatever it is you might want to do. We can easily do that. So the graph editor is incredibly powerful, and I highly recommend that you get used to working in the graph editor. You can also see we have the easing as well of it. Currently you can see it's a very smooth ease from one to the other, which means it's going to move like this. We can also change the tangent of them, so we can select both the keyframes. Here you can actually see that we have the handles of them. So now we can, for instance, make it more linear by dragging up like so, dragging this down like so as well. So now it becomes more linear. So this just means that it has a more linear speed from one value to the other. We can change it so it's like this. Let's see what happens now. Now it actually goes a bit back. So the handles of the actual keyframes can create all sorts of crazy things. Which is really powerful. We can also change them by selecting both of them, going to tangents, and here we can set them to auto, which is what they were at by default. We can also set it to linear, which will make them entirely linear. I mostly use linear when it comes to doing turntables. You'd also use linear if you are actually blocking in the animation as just post to post, then there's nothing fancy going on, then it's literally just linear between them. You can always use the hotkey Alt-V in order to hit play as well. This is what I prefer to do instead of going all the way over here. So you can choose linear. You can choose stepped, and now it goes from one to the other. So now it's going to do nothing, and then it's going to go dong. So it just goes, you can see it just goes straight from one to the other. So there is no, you can see here this time it goes, the time keeps moving, but the value doesn't move. Time keeps moving, but value doesn't move. And then suddenly it goes from one value to another in one movement. So really, really make sure to check out the tangents here. If you want to set key in the middle of something, maybe you want some more control, you can easily do that as well. You can go to the time you want or the frame you want. Then we can right click, then we can hit key again. And now you can see we have created a new key, which means we have a lot more control over our animation. So we can, for instance, make it go like so. So it moves a little bit and then donk. So this is essential when it comes to actually timing the animation. You could, of course, select all of these as well, and then you can animate all of them in one go, but I think it's a lot cleaner to have only animate one channel at a time. If you were to animate all of these, let me do that. Let's go back to frame 1, animate all these, key selected. Now you can see here it's a lot of stuff going on right away. Then we go to the end, and then we key them again, and we can start to move them around, just so we actually have some data on them. And then we can select them all, and then we can key them. And now you can see how stuff goes crazy here. So it becomes quite complicated if you're not careful with what you're animating. But one thing you can do, though, you can always go in and see each individual channel you have been animating. The cool thing about this as well is that you can animate basically anything in Maya. For instance, one thing you might not know is that you can animate visibility. It's right here. It's so easy to think that the only thing you can animate is your translation values, but you can also do this. You can, for instance, set this to be frame 26. It's off. We can set this to a quick little tip. If you want to turn something on and off, you can hit 0 and 1. So we can set this to 0. Now it's invisible. Then we can set a key. Then we can go 1 frame forward. Then we can set 1. And then we can set this to keyable or set key. So now you can see we're actually keying the animation. So we've used this for a project where we had facial expressions, and in the rig, they were turned on and off, very, very anime style facial expressions. They didn't really deform a lot, they were just turned on and off. And we used this in the rig so that we would just key the facial expression on and off just by using visibility. So you can very easily do this. For instance, let's say you have a character which disappears entirely, like he moves behind a bush or something and then he disappears. You can just set the visibility to off and you can just key it. So he goes boop and he just disappears. So pretty useful. And you can of course find it right here as well. If you want to change the way you are viewing the graph editor, you can also hold down Shift and Alt and right mouse button, and now you can scale left to right. And this will just give you some more real estate to work with. You can use the Alt middle mouse button to pan around like in 3D viewport, and you can use Shift and Alt and up and down to really squeeze this up and down. It's really hard to see what's going on if you're viewing it like this, but if you're viewing it like this, you can much easier see what's going on. If you want to delete a key, that's also very easy to do. You can of course select all of them here. Just select the item or the object, select them all, and then we just hit delete. And I can see all the keyframes are deleted. Let's just make this guy pop back. Then we can reset these guys, so we can hover over all of them, hit 0 to reset them, hover over these, the scale attributes, and hit 1 to reset them. Or what we can do, if we want to get back here, Control Z, we can select all of these, then we can right click and we can delete selected. So essentially what we have here is we have keys on the different channels. So what we do now when we hit delete selected, we're not deleting the attributes, we're deleting the keys on the attributes. So delete selected will very easily do that. What you can also do is you can lock certain attributes as well. Let's say you never want to animate the scale of the object. Let's say this is set to 1, and you want to make sure you accidentally never, ever actually change the scale. You can now right-click, select the attributes. You can right-click on them, and you can say lock selected. And now you can see they get this little blue-gray icon next to them. So now if you want to scale it, you actually can't do that. So now if you want to select all of them, you set a key, it's actually impossible to change them. If you want to unlock them, you can select them again, right-click, and then you can set unlock selected. So in short, animation in Maya, when it comes to just the pure basics, is very simple. You click on the channel you want to animate, you set right-click, set key selected, then you move it to, or you change it to the place you want to go, and then you, let's move this up again. Then you right-click and set key selected, and now you can see we have a key. Hit F to frame it in the viewport or in the graph editor, and now we have a key between the two. And now you can start to move the key around, up and down, left to right, whatever it is. Left to right moves it in time, and up and down moves it in when it comes to the value. One more thing before we finish the chapter is play blasting. Play blasting is a feature which allows you to actually render out the animation. This is incredibly useful if you're using this animation in Premiere or something like that. You're doing your animation and you have to review the animation. You're not rendering it, you're just actually reviewing the animation. So the currently animation looks something like this. Let's move this all the way over here. So it starts from frame 1. So essentially what we want to do, we want to get this animation here into frames. So what we can do, we can right click on the time slider here, and we have the button play blast. Let's see what happens when we do that. So this is what happens when we just hit play blast by default. You can see we get this pretty shitty quality, but it still works. It still gives us the animation we have, but there are some things we have to change in order to make this look nicer. What this will do is it will actually give us a preview, or it will actually render the viewport the way it is. So what we can do, we can make it a bit nicer by turning on anti-aliasing. Maybe we can turn on motion blur. We can turn on lights if you have lights in your scene. You can turn on textures if you have that. Maybe you want to make a plane just so you have something which is a bit nicer. So you're not just staring at a blank plane. You're not just staring at the grid, for instance, but you actually have something a bit nicer to look at. You could even actually create a light as well, create a directional light. We can enable lights here as well. You can go to Control A to get to attributes. Then we can use shadows. Then if we click shadows here, we can now see the shadow. So this is just a way to get a little bit more fidelity. And instead of, let's move this down a little. We'll get into lights in another chapter as well. So instead of just making it look extremely basic, we can make it look a little bit nicer by having some nice lights, by having some more environment in our scene. And then we can right click, Play Blast, the options for Play Blast. And now here you can set it from AVI to image. Now this is where you actually render out into a format. Like this is what you do if you're actually in a production, or if you just want to preview it now. AVI, it's not great. You never really want to render into an actual image container or into a video container. But for sake of argument, this now works because the scale from 0.5 to 1, and then we can apply. And now you can see what happens. So now we get a viewport which is much, much nicer than what we had before. So this is how you preview your animation. You would make play blasts. One thing to be aware of is that this actually puts the play blast under the temp directory. This does not put your play blast in the project like you may expect. This puts it under the temporary directory. So just make sure that you are actually saving these out if you're interested in keeping them. So animation, pretty nice and easy. In the next chapter, we will take a look at a very simple but actual practical example of animation as well.